online, on the TuneIn app,
and on your smart speaker.
Play Shock Radio.
This is the sound of Salford.
Shock Radio News.
You're listening to the Shock News Show with Alfie Mulcahy, Ciara Aston and Alfie Garner. Your headlines at 7 o'clock. The Chancellor says it would be irresponsible to rule out more tax rises in the next 5 years after delivering Labour's first budget in over a decade. Rachel Reeves insists her £40 billion worth of hikes will help to rebuild Britain. Employers' national insurance contributions will go up by 1.2 percentage points from April. Fuel duty and inheritance tax will be frozen, though. Billions of pounds is also being set aside to compensate the victims of the Horizon and infected blood scandals. Shadow Chancellor Jeremy Hunt claims families will pay the price, though. Sky's Sam Coates has this.
The thing that's most striking is that the tone of the election campaign, the tone of Labour's promises to the country, sounded like a very different blueprint than the one that we got today. This is big tax, big borrowing in order to do big spending.
A British man is among 95 people who've been killed in severe flooding in eastern Spain. Authorities say the 71-year-old died in a hospital hours after being rescued from his home in Malaga. In sport, Ben Stokes claims masked burglars raided his home in Durham while his wife and 2 young children were there. The England Test captain says jewellery and cherished possessions were taken earlier this month. A single case of a new and potentially deadly strain of Mpox has been detected in the UK for the first time. It was discovered in London, but the UK Health Security Agency insists the public risk is low.
Shock Radio weather.
And in weather, cloudy with low cloud bringing widespread mist and hill fog lingering across the Pennines. A few outbreaks of rain and drizzle across Manchester. But what's new there? Expect overnight lows of 7 degrees. Well, you are listening to the Shock News Show today with Alfie Mulcahy, Alfie Garner and Ciara Aston. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Now, it's budget day. I'm assuming you were both watching intently earlier.
Very much.
Yes.
In middle of lecture.
It's the best way for it. So, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, announced today that she would raise taxes by $40 billion. That's the biggest single tax rise event in history and the biggest shift in economic policy in the last 20 years. Let's hear her reaction in the Commons to that announcement.
This budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality.
You can just hear the gasps in that chamber when she announced that. Everyone expected that it would be about 35 billion, the amount that taxes would go up by in total, the amount that they'd raise, but she went to 40 billion. So the reason she did that is because the previous record was 35 billion. And everyone was saying that she was sort of play it semi-safe and match or go just below what was announced last time. The big things that have happened so far are the tax rates. So rates of income tax and national insurance paid by employees and of VAT haven't changed. So their big manifesto commitment was not to raise taxes on working people. And income tax band thresholds have risen will rise in line with inflation after 2028, preventing more people from being dragged into higher bands as wages rise. Now, you two, people have been saying that this budget has given up on some of Labour's big manifesto commitments to not raise taxes on working people. What are your thoughts on that?
In a sense, it has, because what it's done is, rather than directly affect the employees, it's indirectly done it. So rather than directly increase national insurance contributions, it's indirectly done it towards the employers. And that'll obviously come back in clutch through lower pay rises and changes within organisational structures. But what it also means is that employees will still face the brunt of it because businesses will put their prices up. So in real terms, there'll not be much of a change between both the Conservatives and Labour, and it will end up being felt more probably by people as they do their shop or do any other essential things that they need to do, like energy bills and any additional gas bills.
And something that's kind of been picked up by a lot of people is that business owners, especially those of small businesses, are still working people, and small businesses often rely quite heavily on the incomes they make. It may only be a business of 2 or 3 people, and something that really caught Bridget Phillipson out on Sunday was she was asked by Laura Kunsberg to define what working people were, and I think that's where Labour's really fallen short, isn't it, Ciara?
I'd say so. I think that Labour are trying to find the line of what is working people still. That may take a while, because everyone needs to remember they've only been in government for a few months. This is the first budget, and they are going to take a while to find what is that line. But also, like you said, a lot of small businesses are just 2 or 3 what some people would associate as working people. But I do think it's going to take Labour a few more months to figure out that line.
And that was one of the big things that all the opposition has raised over this, that business rates and the sort of deal for businesses after this budget is really not as ideal as it was for them under the Conservative government. We've got an interview here with James Daly, the former MP for Bury North, who is quite strong on his opinions on those new rules for businesses. Apologies for that. Let's try again. Internet issue. I do apologise. Let's hear from James Daly, the former MP for Bury North. We'll try and get you that a little bit later. He's making the point that it's quite unfair for businesses in this current climate. Also announced in the budget, changes to the minimum wage for over 21s. Ciara, do you want to explain a little bit on this?
So the legal minimum wage for over 21s is to rise from £11.44 to £12.21 per hour from April.
Yes, it absolutely is. And the rate for 18 to 20-year-olds is also going up as well. That's from £8.60 to £10 to sort of level up, in a very Michael Gove way of saying it, to level up the minimum wage. Another thing that they've announced is that defence spending would rise by £2.9 billion next year. That's one of the places the money is going. Another big area is house building. House building. There's £5 billion more for that across the country, and the current affordable homes budget that is going to run until 2026. That's a big Conservative policy, one of Michael Gove's. That's been boosted by £500 million. And sort of the big headline figure is a £22.6 billion increase in the day-to-day health budget for the NHS. But the Liberal Democrats wanted to see more done for social care.
We know, and they know, that our NHS will remain on life support until they fix the crisis in social care. So we are disappointed the government hasn't made more significant or any significant pledges to fixing our social care crisis.
And that is one of the big things that Labour has pledged to tackle but didn't appear in this budget at all. As you were saying, Ciara, it's that new government syndrome where they've made all these promises and they're working through them one at a time. Were there any other things that you two picked out in the budget? I'll come to you first, Alfie, that really stuck out to you.
It's what I picked out was Rachel Reeves' constant going back to what they said in the election and what they said after the election. So her big message was invest, invest, invest. So it's about getting businesses, big business, to reinvest in the UK. Part of that was the international investment summit held earlier this month, which will bring about 40,000 new jobs to the UK. But what it also does, it kind of creates that comparison to what the Conservatives did and what Labour are planning to do over the next 5 years, depending on whether they seek a new election or whether they stick it out for the 5 years. The thing about the national insurance rise is it was partly a manifesto pledge anyway, because they wanted to bring in a real living wage. And for 18 to 20-year-olds, it's one of the biggest rises, that percentage-wise, that I've seen in a few decades, especially since Labour introduced the Minimum Wage Act.
Was there anything that stuck out to you, Ciara?
I think the investing as well. I think the whole borrow to invest was very heavily pushed by Rachel Reeves when she made that speech earlier today. Actually, one of the smaller headlines took my interest in the transport, with the nationwide cap on single bus journeys is now £3 instead of £2. Obviously not in Manchester, because Andy Burnham earlier today has come out and said that he's going to cap it to £2. But I think that for a lot of people, they get the bus to go to work, so maybe it's not as insignificant as we think it is, and a lot of people rely on the bus to get places.
And something that the Green Party pointed out earlier today was that fuel duty today hasn't risen, and it hasn't risen since 2014. That's 10 years. So their big point, and Daisy Cooper from the Liberal Democrats made this as well, that people travelling by car are still very much benefiting from this budget, whereas people travelling by public transport, the greener alternative, the way that in some sections of society is really being encouraged, hasn't been encouraged through this budget. In more transport news, the commitment to deliver upgrades to Trans-Pennine Express rail links between York and Manchester, running via Leeds and Huddersfield, that has been bolstered. The upgrade plans were in place beforehand, but they've been bolstered with a new package of money here. And I quite like this one: an extra £500 million pound pot just to replace potholes across the country.
It's a good reason, to be fair. There's a lot of potholes. Part of their manifesto was to repair 1 million potholes in England. So that 500 million will go part of the way. But it's also a question of, is that also going to encourage more motorists on the road? As the roads get better, will more motorists come back? And is that what Labour really want to do with a 2050 target of net zero and additional climate pledges that they made in the budget today?
Yeah, I think the budget as a whole has really been about distancing from the Conservative ideology. There was a woman talking on the news channel earlier today saying that this was the biggest kind of change in the philosophy of the country through a budget in over 20 years since Tony Blair. Let's have a listen now to the former MP for Bury North, James Daly.
The Labour Party have shown that what they were saying during the general election was not true, was not correct. They said they wouldn't raise taxes on ordinary people, but we've seen national insurance go up, we've seen capital gains tax go up, we've seen inheritance tax go up. We've seen direct tax on really important institutions within Bury, like Bury Grammar School. Now, I'm not afraid to say my son goes to, well, one of my sons goes to Bury Grammar School. I'm extremely proud of that. His mother went to Bury Grammar School. So you see, with the rising in those fees, an attack on aspiration. I know many of the parents at Bury Grammar School. These are ordinary, hard-working people who sacrifice a lot to make the choice and to give their children the best opportunity they think that Bury Grammar will give to them. To attack that, to be a break on aspiration, to be a break on allowing people the opportunity to send their children to an educational environment and to work hard to be able to afford to do that. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? It's not going to raise any money. So why would you do it? Why would you, if you were interested in the hospitality sector, why would you raise national insurance contributions? Why would you cut the business rate relief to 40% in respect to that? Why would you increase beer duty? You're going to put these businesses out of business. Why would you do that? I run a business. I'm a partner in a business in Bury. We employ people. We want to continue to employ people. I need incentives. I need reduced taxation. I need reduced burdens. I need reduced regulation. And I will give people opportunities. How is this budget helping small businesses who want to grow in all parts of the country? How is it doing that?
That was former MP for Bury North, James Daly, talking to Adam Clark at Roche Valley Radio. He is, of course, the former network manager here at Shock, and he sent that along for us earlier today. One of the other big things to happen out of that budget was that there was finally confirmation from the government that High Speed 2 would go all the way to London Euston rather than Old Oak Common. And that's been up in the air for quite a while. Work to start on Euston. It was declared last year that it was, last month that it was too dangerous for operation by an independent body. The Transport Secretary, Louise Hay, last week, she wouldn't confirm it, but now we have that official confirmation. And the hilarious thing was, earlier on today, there were protesters at London Euston protesting against going all the way to Euston, and they had a big pantomime cow with them. So there are lovely, lovely photos of this big pantomime cow outside Euston Station as part of that protest. But I think it's a great thing that we finally have confirmation on that, because works have been stood at a standstill there for quite a while. We've also had new announcements on drinking and vaping. Ciara, do you want to walk us through that?
So there's a new tax of £2.20 per 10 millilitres of vaping liquids, which will be introduced from October 2026. There's a tax on tobacco, and that will increase by 2% above inflation and 10% above inflation for hand rolling tobacco, and tax on non-dry alcoholic drinks to increase by the higher RPI measure of inflation, but tax on dry drinks to be cut by 1.7%.
That tax on that cut in tax on drinks equates to approximately 1 pence in every pint. And that probably won't be passed on to the consumer, but at a landlord level, at a pub ownership level, that'll see higher profits for them across the board on that front. And it comes, of course, after we had rumblings and an announcement last week that disposable vapes would be banned completely by the start of next summer. So this new tax on vaping liquid won't come into effect until that disposable ban has happened as well. Alf, do you want to walk through some of the other kind of things we got today in the budget?
Yeah, can do. So the budget policies will increase UK borrowing by 19.6 billion this year, and then by an average of 32.3 billion over the next 5 years, according to the OBR. Then 11.8 billion pounds we allocated to compensate victims of the infected blood scandal, with an additional 1.8 billion set aside for those wrongly prosecuted post office submasters. And then extra spending in England will lead to 3.4 billion pounds more for Scotland, 1.7 billion pounds more for Wales, and 1.5 billion pounds more for Northern Ireland in devolution payments.
And what I thought was quite interesting earlier was we had Stephen Flynn from the SNP was saying that they were not best pleased with this budget, but was also saying that wasn't saying what from that would be taken into the Scottish budget later this year. Moving on now to the US election. That is only 6 days away now until Americans go to the polls. Loads of them have voted already. There's quite a spirit in America for early voting by post, something that is present over here but not quite as prevalent as it is in the States. Well, our very own Shock radio correspondent Luke Jones is in America for the next week, and he sent this to us.
I'm here in Kansas City in the state of Missouri, where in 6 days' time we will find out who will be the next president of the United States. The poll suggests that this race for the White House is going to be very tight, but after speaking to some members of the public, they are starting to think it's not as close as the media is suggesting. But the only figure that matters is the one on November the 5th. Harris and Trump will be delivering their final rallies later today in some key battleground states. Listen to Shock News next Wednesday for the reaction to the US general election 2024.
And I will absolutely be tuning in, as I'm sure you two will. So at the moment, Vice President Harris, I should say, has a small lead over Trump in the national polling averages. That's since she entered the race at the end of July, and she still remains ahead. But those polls are narrowing, as they often do across campaigns. I'm going to ask you two now for a prediction. In 7 days' time, we come to be doing the Shock News show next week. Who do you reckon will be the new president of the United States?
I reckon it will be Kamala Harris, but only just. I think it will be by 1 or 2 electoral votes. She'll just get over the 270 line?
I think it totally depends on who wins the flip states. I think there will be a couple of states that will determine who will win the presidency. I think it will be Kamala Harris, but it depends whether she wins in those key states.
And the American voting system is very swayed like that. You have these small pockets of the country deciding huge parts of huge proportions rather of who will end up in the White House. On that, Joe Biden today has attacked Donald Trump's supporters following a comedian's controversial joke about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage during a Trump rally.
I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. I don't.
So that's Joe Biden calling Donald Trump's supporters garbage. He's tried to clarify his comments, and he's denied that he was referring to the Republican nominee supporters collectively, saying that he was just referring to that speaker in that big speech at Madison Square Gardens. We had a lot of prominent right-wing figures from across the United States speaking in front of big audiences. Alfie, I know you've been following the US election quite closely. Is there anything that you've picked up in the last week?
Yes, well, the polls again really close. It's about 1.4 in between each of them. But what's happening across the country is the two opponents are getting close and close to the end of their races. Obviously, tomorrow with the last day of campaigning, then it will be Americans head to the polls next Tuesday. But what the Harris campaign has done is got the Las Vegas Fair, which is the largest screen in the world, and they've got a campaign on there. It will run through election day, and their hope is they can get really undecided voters who are swaying between both parties to really cast their vote very last minute for Kamala Harris as a way of deterring Trump from running again, because he has said he's running this election purely to save America from the Democrats. But again, it does come down to 7 key states, all of which have about a fifth of the power across America. That will be found out potentially next Wednesday. It could go even further, though, potentially into early, middle November, where we find out who will take the White House in January. And
you mentioned the Los Angeles sphere there. That is something that the Harris campaign has really got right so far. Their sort of media literacy and how smooth their campaign has been in comparison to Trump's. They've had very, very slick campaign advertising pretty much everywhere, including on that huge sphere in Las Vegas. Whereas Trump's campaign hasn't been quite as smooth on that front, especially on social media. There have been far more gaffes coming from his side of the equation. But he still has that huge base of core supporters that are still willing to back him in pretty much everything he does, Ciara.
He does indeed, but the question is whether those core supporters that voted for him in 2016 and 2020 are going to back him again, or maybe they want to stick with the Democrats. There has been a lot of people who have changed sides, so we will have to see.
Yeah, well, today in her big speech, Kamala Harris warned that Donald Trump is unstable and obsessed with revenge, which are quite strong remarks from someone wanting to become the next president of the United States. Today was her biggest rally yet, and she did it from the same spot in Washington where Donald Trump helped to incite the attack on the US Capitol, which was almost 4 years ago.
Obviously, it comes down to where we'll see the campaigns going over the next 3 days as they prepare for what will be the biggest day in American democracy for at least 24 years. You know, it's not been this close of a race since the Al Gore versus Bush in 2000 election.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. And I'm assuming both of you will you be watching the coverage live overnight?
Yes.
I will be doing entirely that. I will be up from 10 o'clock the day before until potentially 8 p.m. the day after in a marathon of US politics and finding out where America lies.
Nothing beats a good election night watch-along. Well, that is just about it for the Shock News show today. It's been presented by myself, Alfie Mulcahy, Alfie Garner and Ciara Aston. We're going to leave you with a final look at today's main headlines. The Chancellor says it would be irresponsible to rule out more tax rises in the next 5 years after delivering Labour's first budget in over a decade. Rachel Reeves insists her £40 billion worth of hikes will help rebuild Britain. Employers' national insurance contributions will go up by 1.2 percentage points from April. Fuel duty and inheritance tax will be frozen, though. Billions of pounds is also being set aside to compensate victims of the Horizon and infected blood scandals. A British man is among 95 people who've been killed in severe flooding in eastern Spain. Authorities say the 71-year-old died in hospital hours after being rescued from his home in Malaga. Ben Stokes claims masked burglars raided his home in Durham while his wife and 2 young children were there. The England Test captain says jewellery and cherished possessions were taken early this month. A single case of a new and potentially deadly strain of Mpox has been detected in the UK for the first time. It was discovered in London, but the UK Health Security Agency insists that the public risk is low. You've been listening to the Shock News Show. Shock Bulletins return tomorrow morning from 10.